We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Wednesday, February 11th, 2026, coming live on rumble.com/AmRadPod, YouTube at AmRadPod, over at X America News, and my own X handle, which is at Real Steve Friend. Today, guys, we're going to get into the disconnection, the failure to just connect those dots. And that's going to be in the form of deportations hitting a small town in Idaho. Borders worked stunningly to the attention of the communist left. We are boosting babies in the country, and America has a weed problem. So let's get after it. I was thinking about an event that happened years and years ago, very early on in my marriage with Madam Friend, when I was preparing for a show today about the disconnection, failure to connect the dots. And she had a really good friend who was in, we'll characterize it as a troublesome relationship with another man. Now, there was some infidelity going on, lies and manipulation. There was concerns that maybe violence could be over the horizon. And this friend of hers was really in dire straits, and she wanted to reach out. Madam Friend was concerned about her friend for clear and obvious reasons, but she was in a delicate situation. I mean, if you go hard at this guy and things wind up, I guess, sort of working out between them, then you're on record as your friend now knows that you have a negative opinion of him. So how do you strike that negative balance? Well, my wife kind of lays out the narrative. She says, hey, look, this guy's done you wrong. He's lied to you. He's manipulated you. There's been emotional abuse here. We're concerned there could be physical abuse. He's not been faithful to you. And her friend ingested all of this and said to her, you know, you're right. And after all that, we're still together. So he must be the one. She just failed to connect the dots. Actually, good, the exact opposite takeaway from what my wife had intended for it, because she kind of had a predetermined solution to begin with. She wasn't really interested in getting actual feedback from my wife, actual advice on how to go forward, because it was pretty clear. You needed to cut ties, kick this dude to the curb, find someone else. There are other fish in the sea. But her friend didn't want that. She wanted to stay with that guy. So she manipulated that feedback from my wife in order to get to the conclusion that she really wanted to draw the entire time. She was shopping for an opinion and didn't really find it in the form of my wife, but it was words. They made sense to her in some convoluted fashion because the connections weren't there. All the wiring wasn't necessarily all going to the right spot. So let's talk about that in context of mass deportations, enforcement and removal operations, because the American people sent a mandate in November of 2024. Donald Trump, mean orange, literally Hitler, won not just the Electoral College, but the popular vote. And one of the biggest issues of the election in 2024 was illegal immigration. Americans still today, if you're polled by left-wing sources, are saying in majorities they want illegal aliens removed from the country. But the news sources in this country are on the communist left, and they are pushing back on the narrative. So let's begin at the New York Times, which was at one point a newspaper. And they have a headline here that reads, "A raid in a small town brings Trump's deportations to deep red Idaho." And their takeaway, I guess, if you read through this entire article that the New York Times wants you to have, is that those dastardly conservative Republicans, now it's finally come home to roost for them, and they're going to feel the full impact, and they're going to come over to our side. And it's a failure to connect. Let me lay it out for you. People in Wilder, Idaho, didn't give much thought to the dusty horse track west of town known as La Cathedral Arena. But when federal agents swarmed the track on October 19th of last year, weapons drawn, helicopter overhead, unmarked SUVs screeching. They did more than crack an alleged gambling ring and increase deportation numbers. They shattered Wilder's innocent belief that its out of the way location and deep red politics could isolate the town from the raids overtaking other parts of the country. A failure to connect. The New York Times has come to the conclusion that conservative areas like the small town Wilder, Idaho, is of the belief that, well, what's good for thee, not necessarily good for me. Because only a reasonable person, even if you vote for a Republican who's mean orange and literally Hitler, deep down at their core would say, we kind of like illegal aliens here. Maybe they can go to other places, but not our hometown. That's just a failure to connect. That's a failure to actually review the data that's out there. A majority of the people want mass deportations. But New York Times kind of lays out the scenario here where they think they've come to this ultimate conclusion that Wilder, Idaho, the chickens have come home to roost for them. And now the scales will fall away from their eye that this horrible, mean, orange, literally Hitler presidency will result in a shock to their system and a disruption to their way of life. And now they will come to the good side. The arc of history is towards justice, which means that we need to have mass amnesty of 50 million illegal aliens that came in during the Biden auto pen presidency or something. So back to the piece where they lay out how this raid, which wasn't initially for illegal aliens, it was about illegal gambling, and the parenthetical side benefit to it was that they wound up roping in a bunch of illegals. But state and federal leaders praised the raid as successful gambling crackdown. Immigration enforcement was just a fringe benefit, collateral bonus, right? Now, this guy here, his name is Chris Gross. He's a second-generation farmer, and he is opposed to the illegal alien deportations. And he says, we rely on Hispanic labor. Nobody thought something like this could happen here because we have to have people pick the cotton, slave labor style, I guess, according to Chris Gross. The raid nearly destroyed the community, said David Lincoln, a longtime resident, and he is the executive director of a nonprofit economic development agency serving rural towns in western Idaho. So he's a professional, useless person who takes that sweet, sweet government cash to pay himself a nice, healthy salary in order to give a pittance out to these rural areas. The government taxes you, steals from you, ingests it, shaves off a nice spot for itself there, and then pushes it out to these types. And he said that this has been devastating to the community, nearly destroyed. Now, the police chief, whose name is Dusty Tveit, interesting last name, he was not included in the local, state, and federal task force. Now, did he have to be? Is there actually a mandate to communicate between local and state and federal authorities on the subject of enforcement and removal operations? But he also commented that most of the people who were removed from the Wilder, Idaho, were not from Wilder, Idaho. They'd come from California and Washington State. So how is that a disruption to this local community? How is it interfering with the DNA of Wilder, Idaho to remove not just non-American illegal aliens, but people who aren't from Idaho at all? Again, New York Times, not really connecting the dots here. It's not really making the case that because ICE and federal authorities went forward and removed illegal aliens from this community, that it's been such a shock and awe to their community that it's going to necessarily result in them being more open to the idea that we need to have mass amnesty. Before we move off this, just want to close it out here again from the New York Times. A raid in a small town brings Trump's deportations to deep red Idaho. Plenty of people in Wilder's Hispanic population attended the races at this track that wound up getting the illegal gambling raid on it, or had friends. Quote, "It wasn't a secret," said Miss Marisa Fernandez. "It just wasn't something white people went to." Now, 91% of people in Wilder voted for Donald Trump in 2024. About 60% of the population is Latino, but their voting preference is unclear, maybe because they're not eligible voters. So the parting comment that the New York Times felt was really uber necessary to share in order to make the point that this conservative area, 9 in 10 voters voted for Donald Trump, meaning 9 in 10 voters voted for mass deportations. The parting thought is, well, we weren't really hurting anything. White people shouldn't have been involved in this. So why can't we just camp out here in violation of federal law? And because it's been a shock to the system there in Wilder, the New York Times thinks certainly any reasonable person who reads the New York Times, and that's what their idea of reasonable is, would come to the conclusion that we need to stop all of these enforcement and removal operations and just accept that illegal aliens are part of the new melting pot. No, no. 91% of people there voted for mass deportations. This doesn't offend their sensibilities. And if you're an American, we kind of have that pesky, dusty document, which includes a 13th Amendment that said we can't have slavery anymore. You can't make people work and not get paid. How is that any different than saying, well, we need that labor in this farming community, work for slave wages? That's an abhorrent idea. That's violative of our morality and our principles in this country. That's what those people in Idaho voted for. And if you come away with the conclusion that this is going to dissuade them or change their perspective, I just think you're not really connecting the dots on this one. Not all the wires are going where they need to go. And again, another sort of illegal alien topic we're talking about, not connecting the dots, or maybe just lacking a little bit of self-awareness. Got this funny video because shockingly, the communist left came to the realization that border walls work.
We are literally creating a place that we know who's coming and going in and out of our neighborhoods.
In the middle of the road at 32nd and Cedar Avenue, a makeshift roadblock turned this intersection into a roundabout. Cars slowed as drivers noticed, some honked, others asked questions, and one man brought food for the people standing watch.
Hi, sir. Thank you so much.
How did it make you feel just seeing a community checkpoint in your neighborhood?
Well, it felt fine. I don't have any trouble with folks helping out.
Wade Haynes has been standing at this corner twice a day for one reason: to stand up against ICE activity and keep his community safe. He chose this corner. Others chose this intersection.
It's kind of inspiring. It's like, wow, okay. We've got folks out there who are kind of taking care of us, looking out for us. That's good.
But Minneapolis police stepped in, clearing the roadblock and restoring flow of traffic.
Honestly, I'm kind of sad about it.
Still, residents say the roadblock was necessary.
We need to keep our neighbors safe, so we will be doing this again.
Wow. It's almost like border walls work. Now, you can't set up an obstruction in a roadway. That's actually violative of state law. There's traffic laws for that. But props to them. I mean, they're the ones that have been saying for years and years, we don't need a border wall. We shouldn't have funding for that. Well, because they wanted the 30, 40, 50 million illegal aliens to stream across the southern border. But making that connection there, I mean, props where props is due. I guess that it's good for me and not for thee to actually have a barrier between your land and another to stop an invasion from happening. We can stay actually on illegal aliens, and this is pertaining to privacy. And again, a failure to make the connection, the disconnection that exists. This comes from Politico. Headline reads, Democrats fear body cameras could be ICE's new mass surveillance tool. Well, last week they were saying that they wanted to have body cameras. They can't seem to make up their mind. So from the piece, a push to put body cameras on all ICE agents has Democrats running headlong into a new problem. Fear that the technology will provide another avenue for mass surveillance of protesters. Now, the Department of Homeland Security's policies on body cameras prohibit agents from using the body cameras solely to record people engaging in First Amendment activities, but it does allow for filming during arrests, and the bulk of ICE's filming of protesters has been during its enforcement operations. That last part is worth taking note of. I am on record. I think body cameras are outstanding. I'm in favor of transparency. As long as we're going to outsource violence and vengeance and justice to the government, which has the guns in order to do that, to take away your freedom, potentially your life. I want maximum transparency is what's going on here. Now, there's two conflicting ideas here for the communists, right? They want that transparency. Really what they want are some video of a shooting going on where they can pull it out of context and say that, we need to defund the police or end all the enforcement removal operations. But we'll just take it, give them maximum latitude. Okay, we want transparency, but we don't want the surveillance aspect to it. And they're saying, well, maybe we don't need body cameras. You can't quite make the connection because as it lays out here in this Politico piece, the body cameras are being used during enforcement and removal operations, which means they're being used during arrests. And they're capturing the protesters engaging in perfectly protected First Amendment activity during those arrests, which would mean that those protests are in very close proximity to the arrests, which means that there's not really a perimeter established around the Department of Homeland Security officers, ICE, Customs and Border Protection, whoever is doing the enforcement removal operation. There's not a perimeter established, which means that citizens are just kind of walking into a crime scene, which is kind of dangerous. Can't make a connection. You know what would help communists? If you had your local, municipal, county, state, what have you, law enforcement officers enforcing local, municipal, county, and state law and establishing a perimeter to ensure public safety so that people can engage in perfectly First Amendment protected activity without obstructing a federal operation, without getting in the way of the federal agents doing one of the few things that our pesky, dusty document requires of them to do, and that is protect the borders and remove people who came in. If you actually had police out there protecting the citizens, protecting their civil rights to engage in the First Amendment protected activity of protest and gathering, then they wouldn't have to worry about the body cameras capturing them, because the body cameras would only be capturing the arrests going on between the Department of Homeland Security professionals and the illegal aliens who are now being arrested. They couldn't make that connection, though, which is why they're going to go back and forth. Do we want cameras? Do we not want cameras? When really the entire time, if they had their people not engaging in the false belief that they can make their state or their city a sanctuary for illegal aliens, then that entire trouble wouldn't be there for them. All right, let's come off of the illegal immigration and let's talk about some babies. So I saw this piece over at the New York Times, and it's just reminiscent of true communism just hasn't been tried, right? They come so close to the conclusion that they're wrong, and then they just double down on things. So from the New York Times, at one point a newspaper, this is an opinion piece. It's titled, "Want More Babies? Abolish Commutes." Not communes, commutes. So it's an interesting idea. It's an interesting suggestion that the writer here just couldn't get all the way to making the most sense. So panicked by falling fertility rates, which hit a record low of 1.6 children per woman in 2024. That's like half a child beneath replacement rates. That's crisis level, for those who don't know. Now, the presidential administration has floated all kinds of ideas. They wanted to launch the Trump accounts for the newborns, and they're soliciting outside proposals and motherhood medals. Like, you have a baby and they give you a presidential medal. That seems kind of dumb. And the $1,000 kids accounts, which I'm seeing now commercials for, is straight up communism. Okay, this is an aside. The government's going to steal my money, your money, through taxation, and is going to reappropriate it into an investment account for somebody else's kid. If I want to set up a college account for my kid, I will. It's my money. If I want to set up a college account for another kid who I don't know, I will. It's my money. But for the government to take my money and put it into an investment account to encourage people to have babies, that's kind of like picking winners and losers. It's kind of like from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. That's straight up communism. And on top of that, they're doing it in order to have investment accounts, which go directly into the stock market, which means that the government is artificially boosting the stock market, which is the top companies that are publicly traded. So it's a relationship between government and private industry. So it's fascist. So we have communism and fascism. And that's been the route that we've gone here, as opposed to the structural changes that we could have seen that would have a permanent solution that the government doesn't need to be involved in. But those are my personal thoughts. Let's get to the actual idea here behind this opinion essay from the New York Times. Headline: Want more babies? Abolish commutes. The administration is blind to a proven fix that is right in front of us, one that costs nothing: hybrid work. If both parents move from full-time in the office to working at home, statistically, you're going to get half a kid extra per couple, because you have opportunity there, right? Like, you can't get pregnant by email, as they jokingly say, and they have less time commuting, so there's more time for family. But Mr. Trump has set a terrible example on remote work, demanding on day one that federal employees return to work in person. Dozens of major companies have followed suit. So the president required people who work in government, who are supposed to be essential. We are stealing money from American citizens, taxing them, in order to pay people to perform vital services. If they're not essential, I don't know why you have the job. And he's saying, you got to come to the office. You can't just work at home in a non-restrictive waistband like I do here on the American Radicals podcast if you're going to serve the American people. And then all these other businesses followed suit. But if we created more government jobs, which would require more theft, taxation, and then allowed people to work from home, then we could have more babies. That's really what it gets to, right? We attempted also to freeze childcare funding. You mean government funded childcare services? You mean the government taxing from citizens in order to pay other people to have jobs to take care of their kids? So taking money from people, which makes them poorer, or printing money, which again causes inflation when the dollars in their account become worth less and worth less until they become worthless, i.e. poorer, making the citizens poorer, which would necessitate them to work more in order to sustain their lifestyle so that they can't be home with their kids. And then we take that money and pay other people to take care of their kids. The government is the solution here, according to this opinion piece from the New York Times. We need to spend more money at the government level in order to facilitate more babies. Or, if I'm going to make the connection, that three-prong, it's almost to the outlet. Or what if we got rid of all of the programs like government-run childcare and healthcare, things that aren't in our pesky, dusty document? Because the charges that are in there are finite, not very many of them. Coin money, do some treaties, protection against fraud and force, protect the border. I don't see any healthcare in there. I don't see any child care in there. Promoting the general welfare is not Obama phones. Promoting the general welfare is following the charges that are in the pesky, dusty document to ensure that we have our life, liberty, and property, meaning the money in our bank accounts, so that we can sustain ourselves without daddy government getting involved. And if you got rid of all those things, well, that would mean that the dollars in our bank accounts wouldn't become worthless anymore. There would actually be some deflation. People would have greater overall buying power. They might be able to sustain their lifestyle on one income, and mom wouldn't have to go to work. But we got to keep the narrative going, right? Women need a man like a fish needs a bicycle. The calling that they have, that innate desire to have babies to take care of, that has to be pushed on down. You got to get to the office. You got to get into that cubicle and make sure that the spreadsheets are all lined up. And then, when you have some pushback on that, because you really do have an innate desire to be a mom, we'll just keep doing the widget calculations from a home computer. That'll be the solution. That'll definitely give you the satisfaction. We're so close. And we've now set up an infrastructure in this country where the idea is pretty simple. Cause the prices to necessarily skyrocket through inflation, which necessitates people to go out and get more jobs, second jobs, or mom and dad need to get jobs. We need to have two incomes in order to keep up with the pace. And then who's going to take care of the kids? Well, they'll just hire somebody. So now instead of Ward Cleaver going off to work and June staying home, Warren and June both go off and we pay for childcare services. So we've got 3 jobs instead of 1. That's good for the GDP. Meanwhile, everybody suffers because we're not following through with the most rewarding thing that I can attest is I made people. That's really my greatest overall achievement. Now I got some adjoining pieces here we want to get to where they're just so close and they won't allow themselves to do it. And this is a piece from NPR. Headline, 3 generations of women in one family show how choices of motherhood have changed. And it tracks a grandma, a mom, and the daughter, now all adults, and how where they're at in life was completely different due to their generations. So the grandma, she's now 93. Her name's Barbara. She said during her childbearing years, there wasn't a big question about whether she was going to do with her life. Yeah, she was going to have babies. That's kind of what it's all about. Mom, her name is Cynthia, she's 65, says she was part of a generation that grew up receiving messages about what women's lives should be because she grew up when the days of feminism were really taking off and she wanted to be a working mom and she faced down all these different problems. And now the daughter, Carolyn, herself, having children has never felt like a high priority. She says her focus has been less on family, more on getting an education and establishing a career. That sounds really fulfilling. When she's in her last moments on earth, she'll look around that hospital bed at all of her coworkers, I'm sure. Caroline and her husband worry about the costs that come with raising a child, and especially the cost of housing and the impact of climate change on future generations. So push pause on the climate change. Yeah, they're worried about the costs of housing. You know what would help with the cost of housing? Enforcing the borders, removing 50 million illegal aliens. But we can't do that. That will actually offend the sensibilities of a small town in Idaho. We should just allow those people to be there. Would also help with the cost of living, not having a system set up where the government steals significant portions of your income or inflates the currency to fund government programs that are not in our pesky, dusty documents at all, just invented out of whole cloth, out of the good and plenty clause. That's an invisible ink on the back of the Declaration of Independence. They're so close. And then we got to throw in the necessary reference to climate change because of heavy industry for the last 120 years has caused the temperature to go up, I guess. Or first it's going up and then it's going down and then things are kind of staying the same. And then that's always a problem. And I found this and it made me laugh. So it's worth throwing out to you all on the AmRadPod. So in March of 2024, we got the headline from the New York Times at one point in the newspaper, and it reads, weirdly warm winter has climate fingerprints all over it, study says. And then this year, just recently, what's up with this big freeze? Some scientists see climate change link. So as you see there, the concerns over climate change are not really well-founded, but it's a healthy talking point, a way to justify not doing the thing that you were put on planet Earth to do, and that is to make more people. But if you don't want to do that, because you're worried about the cost of living or you're worried about the sun monster being mad at you for driving an SUV, you know what you could do? You know where you can channel that energy? It could be towards stopping ICE from deporting illegal aliens as they're supposed to do, or a more fun one, fur babies. So from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, headline reads, do dogs offer more satisfying relationships than people? Yeah, they actually made the case, guys. During the COVID lockdown, many of us struggled with the monotony of spending too much time cooped up with other humans, our children, romantic partners, roommates. Meanwhile, relationships with dogs seem to flourish. A 2025 study found that dog owners tend to rate their pets more highly than their human loved ones in several areas, such as companionship and support. We were a great country once, but now that the guardrails have been completely removed on our out-of-control government getting involved in every aspect of our lives, destroying the cost of living, leading people to the conclusion that the government should just be there for all things, and we've broken down the family structure. The takeaway from the Washington Post that they're actually articulating at first is that people are justified in wanting to spend more time with their dogs than other people. But they do want to present the counter narrative. And the counter narrative is that it isn't really healthy. You don't say. It's not really healthy. Oh, you mean you thought I was talking about people, right? No, no. Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, from the headline, Do Dogs Offer More Satisfying Relationships Than People? It's really not healthy to care more for your dogs than other people because it's unhealthy for the dogs. Veterinarians are concerned that the rise of fur baby lifestyle, in which people treat pets like human children, can harm animals, as owners are seeking unnecessary veterinary care, tests, and medications. Yeah, that's right. They are so disconnected from reality that not only do they say that it's probably a good thing for you to care more for your chihuahua than for your baby. In fact, get a second chihuahua instead of having a baby. But if you coddle that chihuahua a little too much, it might be bad for the chihuahua. There's no connection with reality here. All right, I've got one more that I want to get to here. And again, we're doing a whole host of different topics. And this one is kind of pushing me. Like I'm open to having my mind changed on things. I'm open to considering all different avenues. I'm not really set and hardened on all things. I'm a critical thinker. I'm a common sense extremist on this one. And this one's caused me to evaluate my perspectives on liberty and autonomy and government involvement because I'm doing an honest assessment, unlike the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, because it pertains to the devil's lettuce, the marijuana, guys. Headline, we legalize marijuana. Now we must regulate it. More government. So, I'm sorry, this is from the New York Times, not the Washington Post. And it came out a couple of days ago. Now, 18 million people in the United States have used marijuana almost daily. More Americans now use marijuana daily than alcohol. I actually have a visual aid for that one. You can see 18 million people smoking dope 21 days a month. I mean, it's 2 out of 3 days. 15 million are doing it 4 to 20 days, and 11 million are doing it 3 days or fewer. So a lot of people smoking on that devil's lettuce. But this piece from the New York Times goes into a retraction almost. This is from the editorial board where they were recommending like full on, unfettered legalization of marijuana, all about freedom, right? And now they're going back and they're reevaluating it. True communism has never been tried, right? So the argument here is that, it's kind of gotten out of hand. I mean, we have some unintended consequences attached with it, but how do we counter that? America should not go back to prohibition to fix these problems. Every year, authorities arrested hundreds of thousands of Americans for marijuana possession. The people who suffered the legal and financial consequences were disproportionately Black, Latino, and poor. I'm kind of surprised they didn't throw women in there. That is, after all, the New York Times, asteroid hits tomorrow, women and minorities hit worst. The first step in a strategy to reduce marijuana abuse should be a federal tax on pot. Oh, more theft. Great. If a joint cost $10 instead of $5, it would mean a lot of extra money for someone now smoking it. So they're arguing that people would not incur that cost and the government would get some sweet, sweet money, which they would use for, I'm sure, only the best government projects. My counter to that is, wouldn't that tax disproportionately affect Black and brown and poor people, seeing as how they're the ones that are using marijuana more? I mean, how do you justify that, New York Times? You haven't really made the connection there, have you? Isn't that kind of like a secret racist tax? But make illegal any marijuana product that exceeds a THC level of 60% and impose higher taxes on more potent forms. Kind of like we're going to tax hard liquor more than beer. We're going to set an arbitrary number. I don't know what THC level, 60% if it's very potent or not potent, but according to the New York Times, they're the arbiters of what constitutes high potency. And they want to bequeath that ability to the federal government to determine what is and isn't too strong of dope. And also, we're going to have higher taxes on it. The takeaway is the unfortunate truth is that the loosening of marijuana policies, especially the decision to legalize pot without adequately regulating it, and get the ATF on that, has led to worse outcomes than many Americans expected. The federal government needs to be part of these solutions. Now, here is where I kind of come up on two conflicting ideas in my head. I do not want federal government involved in just about anything. You line everybody up on the political spectrum from total government to total anarchy. I'm like 2 or 3 guys away from the total anarchist. There is a place for government. We do have a pesky, dusty document that says what it's for. It's a social compact. You give up some of your liberties in return for certain charges of the federal government. Okay? That's well established. And then you have personal autonomy, right? I mean, do you want the government telling you what you can and can't put into your body? I don't think that it was appropriate to put an experimental gene juice into your arm, and any sort of requirement of that was wholly inappropriate, unconstitutional, illegal. But then we come to autonomy and liberty. And I think what I've basically come around to is you have the ability to swing your fist in the air as much as you want. That point stops, though, when your fist hits my nose. And I'm going to apply the same thing to the devil's lettuce. You want to ingest something that makes you basically retarded, addicts you to it, the gateway drug, and don't give me the whole, that's a myth. I've seen enough people who I've arrested for drug offenses. It all started with weed. That stops when it hits my nose. If you make me smell that skunk odor, that's offending me. That's now impacting my life because I've chosen not to ingest it. So I'm actually for prohibition. I'm open. You could put it in the comments, make the argument that we need to allow marijuana because the upside of it, the objective goods associated with it are just so damn awesome that we need to have Steve just smelling that reek, that odor all the time, as I do in Florida. You know, I was at a gathering for my son's Pop Warner, was talking to one of the coaches, and he sees me out there every single morning pounding the pavement running. And he said, hey, I see you when I'm driving by. Is the car fumes, is that disruptive to you? I mean, does it kind of hurt your ability to breathe when you're running? And I was like, nope. But the weed does, because every car that's driving to work in the morning, high as a kite. I'm not for that. I want that gone. But for our purposes today, talking about like the disconnection, the New York Times said, hey, we messed up. We want to reassess where we're at. We said total legalization, but really what we wanted was more regulation and more government involved, because freedom needs to be allowed, but we need to have government there to make sure we harness it and profit from it. They're so close. They're so close. But when they have the predetermined outcome that they want, which is enhanced government at every single turn, then they're going to hear the advice and not really heed what it's saying. My wife gave her friend advice. She said, this guy's kind of a dirtbag. I can't really tell you to kick him to the curb, but I'm going to lay out the case and leave it up to you. But if you wanted to stay with him all along, whatever evidence gets presented to you, in the case of her friend, she just turned and interpreted and came to the conclusion that all of that was the reason that she couldn't possibly kick this dirtbag to the floor, to the curb. But now, same thing can be applied here. You have illegal aliens that are just flooding in, and that should be a problem for people who voted for removing them. And when the government goes about doing the thing that we voted for, that should drive us to. We got communists in the streets saying things like, well, border walls work, but for us, but we shouldn't have them because it's anti-human. Babies, we need the government involved in that. We need the government stealing money from others so that they can support more babies, when that's just going to create further problems that are going to necessitate people not having the lifestyle that's necessary for babies. The disconnection is real, and it's really just because you're going into it with predetermined outcome that we're seeing all across the board from our communists in the media and in government. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for us today, but I do want to give you a nice palate cleanse. I'm not all for the Olympics, especially the Winter Olympics. All the sports are kind of lame, but I do realize that some people are really interested in ice shuffleboards. I mean, curling. And I found this, and it made me laugh because this is kind of like curling, right? Today's palate cleanse. Remote work. He could be a remote Olympian. That should go over real well when it comes to making lots of babies. All right, guys, that'll do it for us today on the AmRadPod. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe, share it, leave a comment anywhere you can on Spotify, on iHeart, iTunes, on rumble.com/AmRadPod, and on YouTube at AmRadPod. Plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals Podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRad.